Lieutenant Marcus Hayes stood uncomfortably at the edge of the formal reception, tugging at his dress uniform collar. These diplomatic gatherings were part of his assignment as Earth's military liaison to the interstellar community, but he'd never gotten comfortable with them. The Grand Hall on Nexus Station was filled with representatives from dozens of species, all engaged in the careful dance of diplomatic networking. Marcus had done his required socializing, exchanged pleasantries with the appropriate officials, and was now looking for a polite opportunity to leave. That's when he noticed her. A Velrani woman stood near the far wall, observing the gathering with detached interest. She was tall and elegant, with the distinctive long ears and striking features of her species, but there was something about her presence that seemed different, otherworldly in a way that went beyond species differences. She'd been standing in that same spot for at least an hour, Marcus realized. Alone. Not networking, not socializing, just watching. Marcus felt a kinship with that isolation. He also hated these events and spent most of them looking for excuses to escape. The other attendees seemed to unconsciously avoid her section of the room, creating a buffer zone of empty space around her. Marcus assumed it was some kind of cultural protocol he didn't understand. There were so many social rules in interstellar diplomacy that he was constantly worried about violating something important. But mostly, she just looked lonely. Marcus made a decision and crossed the room toward her. As he approached, he noticed how conversations quieted slightly, how people tracked his movement with what looked like concern or shock. He ignored this, focusing on the woman who turned to watch his approach with an expression of mild curiosity. "Excuse me," Marcus said with a friendly smile. "Would you like to dance? These formal receptions are painfully boring, and you look like you might appreciate an excuse to do something other than stand here watching diplomats perform networking rituals." She stared at him for a long moment, her expression shifting through surprise to something like wonder. "You're asking me to dance?" "Yes, unless that's culturally inappropriate. I'm still learning all the various diplomatic protocols, so if I just committed some terrible error, I apologize. I just thought you might want some company. No one has asked me to dance in," she paused as if calculating. "A very long time. Yes, I would like that." Marcus led her to the small dance floor, where a few other couples were already moving to the soft music. As they began dancing, Marcus was competent but not particularly skilled. He found himself genuinely enjoying the conversation. She was brilliant, asked questions about Earth and humanity with real curiosity rather than polite interest. They talked about Earth's history, about humanity's tendency to explore despite danger, about what it meant to be lonely in a crowded room. "You're very brave," she observed at one point, her voice carrying something Marcus couldn't quite identify. "Brave? I just asked you to dance. That's not particularly brave. Most beings who know what I am wouldn't dare approach me so casually. They would maintain respectful distance or approach with elaborate formal protocols." Marcus assumed she meant high status or cultural differences. "Well, I don't know what you are beyond a person who looked lonely at a diplomatic function. Seemed like a good reason to say hello." She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "That's precisely why this matters. You didn't know, so you were simply kind." Around them, Marcus noticed other attendees watching with expressions ranging from shock to something like horror. He figured he'd violated some protocol he didn't understand and made a mental note to check with his diplomatic advisor later. After the dance ended, the woman, who'd introduced herself simply as Lyra, thanked him with obvious sincerity. "This has been the most genuine interaction I've had in longer than you can imagine. Thank you for seeing me as someone worth asking to dance. Of course, everyone deserves companionship, especially at these tedious diplomatic receptions." She laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise her. "You're remarkable. Your species is remarkable. Thank you, Marcus Hayes." As she walked away, a diplomatic aide rushed up to Marcus looking pale and slightly panicked. "Lieutenant Hayes, do you have any idea who that was?" No, Marcus admitted. Should I? Did I just commit a massive diplomatic incident? The aide looked at him with an expression mixing disbelief and something like respect. That was Queen Lyra of Talvaris, the vampire queen. She's over 800 years old, has ended entire wars through personal combat, is feared across multiple systems, and is considered one of the most dangerous beings in known space. You just casually asked her to dance like she was a random guest. Marcus felt his blood run cold. The vampire queen. Yes, Velrani vampires are apex predators. Queen Lyra is the apex of apex predators. People don't approach her casually. They maintain respectful distance and only interact when absolutely necessary for diplomatic purposes. And you just walked up and asked her to dance. She accepted, Marcus said weakly. Yes. Which is even more shocking. She never engages in casual social interaction. Never. The fact that she danced with you and seemed to actually enjoy the conversation is unprecedented. Marcus needed to apologize, or explain, or something. He found Queen Lyra in a private alcove away from the main reception, looking out at the stars through the station's massive viewport. Your Majesty, he said, approaching cautiously, I had absolutely no idea who you were. I didn't mean any disrespect by approaching you so casually. She turned, and her expression was amused rather than angry. You showed me more respect than anyone has in centuries, Lieutenant Hayes. You saw me as a person who might be lonely rather than as a monster to fear, or a queen to perform elaborate deference toward. Why would I be offended? Because I treated you like a random person at a party instead of treating me like what everyone else does. Like something dangerous to avoid, like a throne to bow before. Lyra's voice was gentle. Marcus, do you know what it means to be feared for 800 years? I can't imagine. It means isolation. Absolute, profound isolation. People approach me with terror or excessive formality. No one simply talks to me. No one asks me to dance. No one treats me as if I might want company or conversation or any of the normal interactions that social beings need. She looked back at the stars. You didn't know to be afraid, so you were simply kind. That's remarkable. Humans are good at being kind without meaning to, Marcus said. It's one of our better traits. Your species evolved as persistent predators on a death world, constantly threatened by stronger, faster predators. Yet you've developed deep capacities for compassion and cooperation. You approach the unknown with curiosity rather than just fear. That's extraordinary. We learned that the scariest-looking things aren't always actually dangerous, and that cooperation helps more than isolation. I am dangerous, Lyra said quietly. I've ended military conflicts through personal combat. I've lived for centuries acquiring knowledge and power. Most species' instinct to fear me is correct. Maybe, but you weren't hurting anyone tonight. You were just standing alone at a reception. The actual danger seemed pretty low. Lyra looked at him with an expression mixing surprise and something deeper. You assessed the actual situation rather than reacting to my reputation. That's exactly what I meant about humans being remarkable. Over the following days, Marcus and Queen Lyra continued talking. She was genuinely fascinated by him and by humanity, and he was discovering that the feared vampire queen was actually interesting company when you got past the terror. Let me understand this correctly, Lyra said during one conversation in a quiet garden on the station. You approached me because I looked lonely, not because you wanted political advantage or diplomatic favor. Yes, you were standing alone for hours. Everyone was avoiding you. It seemed wrong. It seemed wrong that the vampire queen was alone. It seemed wrong that anyone was alone when they clearly wanted company. The vampire queen part just didn't register because I didn't know that's what you were. Lyra was quiet for a moment. In vampire culture, we're apex predators. We live for centuries, sometimes millennia. We acquire power, knowledge, and the ability to end threats decisively. This creates profound isolation. Other species fear us. Even other vampires maintain careful hierarchies and distance. As queen, I'm even more isolated, powerful enough that no one challenges me, feared enough that no one approaches me casually. That sounds incredibly lonely. It is. For 800 years, I've watched people interact with warmth and companionship, while I exist in a sphere of fear and formal distance. You broke that pattern without even realizing it because you didn't know to be afraid. But if I'd known you were the vampire queen, I probably would have been too intimidated to approach you, Marcus admitted. So ignorance was useful. Not ignorance, courage. You saw someone isolated and chose to include them. Even now, knowing what I am, you continue talking to me as if I'm simply a person rather than a monster or a throne. That's courage. You're not a monster. You're a person who happens to be very powerful and very old and apparently very lonely. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. Most beings can't separate my power from my personhood. They see the queen or the vampire, never both simultaneously, certainly never just Lyra who might want to dance at a reception. But Marcus thought about this. Humans evolved constantly threatened by things that could kill us easily. We learned to assess actual danger versus perceived danger. You could probably kill me in about a second if you wanted to. But you don't want to, so the danger is theoretical, not actual. That means I can just talk to you like a person because that's what you actually are. Your species' evolutionary history created this remarkable combination of caution and compassion. You're careful enough to survive but compassionate enough to approach someone who looks lonely despite theoretical danger. That's beautiful in its way. It's just being decent to people, or well to persons. Species doesn't change that. But it does for most species. Interspecies compassion is rare. Approaching apex predators with kindness rather than fear is almost unheard of. Yet you did it naturally, without thinking about how unusual it was. But because you looked lonely, that trumped you being potentially dangerous. I guess that's the human part. We're social creatures who hate seeing others isolated, even when those others could theoretically kill us. But Lyra smiled, the genuine expression she'd shown when they first danced. You've given me something I haven't had in centuries, simple human companionship. Not strategic alliances or formal diplomatic relations. Just friendship with someone who sees me as worth befriending. You are worth befriending. You're interesting, brilliant, and remarkably patient with a human who keeps accidentally violating protocols around vampire royalty. But there are no protocols being violated. That's the point. You treat me as a person rather than as a set of formal rules. That's exactly what I need. The developing friendship between Lieutenant Marcus Hayes and Queen Lyra became a subject of intense diplomatic interest. A human casually befriending the vampire queen was unprecedented, and various species weren't sure how to interpret it. Marcus's commanding officer called him in for what was clearly a carefully considered conversation. Hayes, do you understand the political implications of you forming a friendship with the vampire queen? Sir, I asked someone to dance at a reception. I didn't realize it would become a diplomatic incident. But everything involving Queen Lyra is a diplomatic incident. She's one of the most powerful beings in known space. The fact that she's taken an obvious interest in you, in humanity, has massive implications for Earth's standing in the interstellar community. But she just wanted someone to talk to, sir. That may be true. But the result is that the vampire queen now has positive views toward humanity specifically, because you showed her kindness without knowing who she was. That's diplomacy at its most effective, even if it was accidental. Queen Lyra made clear to various diplomatic channels that she valued Marcus's friendship specifically, because it wasn't politically motivated. He approached me because he thought I looked lonely, she told an assembly of diplomatic representatives. Not because he wanted advantage or favor. That genuine human compassion is why I value his company. It's also why I'm advocating for deeper diplomatic ties between my people and Earth. A species capable of that kind of instinctive kindness toward the unknown is worth knowing. During a private conversation, Lyra explained what his gesture had meant. In vampire culture, there's a concept called recognition, when someone sees you as you actually are rather than as your reputation or power suggests. You recognized me as a lonely person at a gathering rather than as a feared queen. That recognition is sacred because it's so rare. I still would have asked you to dance even if I'd known who you were, Marcus said. You looked isolated, and that seemed wrong. Everyone deserves companionship, regardless of how powerful or scary their reputation is. Most humans wouldn't have had that courage. Most beings of any species wouldn't. Maybe most beings haven't spent enough time around actually dangerous things to develop good threat assessment. Humans evolved on a planet that was constantly trying to kill us. We learned to distinguish between things that are actually threatening and things that just look scary. You weren't actively threatening anyone. You were just alone. Those are different things. That distinction between power and threat, between capability and intention, that's profound. Most species see my power and assume threat. You saw my isolation and offered companionship. Because isolation seemed like the actual problem. Your power was just context, not the issue. 6 months after that initial dance, Marcus and Lyra attended another diplomatic reception together, this time with everyone fully aware of who she was and of their friendship. Lyra was no longer standing alone. Marcus ensured she had company, introduced her to other humans who were less intimidated once they saw their lieutenant treating her as a friend, facilitated conversations that were genuine rather than just formal. You've changed something fundamental, Lyra told Marcus as they watched the reception from a quieter alcove. For 800 years, I accepted isolation as the price of power. You showed me it didn't have to be that way. I just asked you to dance. You saw me as worth asking, as someone who might want to dance rather than as something to fear. That simple human kindness broke through centuries of isolation and showed me that connection was still possible. Everyone deserves connection. Species, power, reputation. None of that changes the fundamental need to not be alone. That's the human perspective that fascinates me. You see commonality rather than difference as the starting point. You approached a vampire queen because she looked lonely, not because you had some grand plan or diplomatic strategy. Just simple human compassion. It's not that complicated. You looked sad and alone. I could do something about that. So I did. And in doing so, you changed the trajectory of vampire-human relations, gave me the first genuine friendship I've had in centuries, and proved that courage and kindness can reach even the most feared beings in the galaxy. Marcus smiled. That's a lot of weight to put on asking someone to dance. That's the power of simple human gesture. You didn't see a monster or a throne. You saw a person who might want to dance. That recognition meant everything. The human who'd casually asked a vampire queen to dance, because she looked lonely, had proven that genuine respect and simple courage could disarm even the most powerful and feared beings in the galaxy. His ignorance of her status had given him the courage to show kindness. That kindness had broken through centuries of isolation built by fear and power. And that breakthrough had shown everyone watching that sometimes the most profound diplomatic achievements come from simply treating people, regardless of their power or reputation, as worthy of compassion and companionship. The vampire queen who'd been alone for 800 years finally had a friend. And all because one human had looked at her and thought, "She looks lonely, I should ask her to dance." Sometimes the simplest human gestures carried the most power.